Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Thank you for being here each and every week as we do this audio-only podcast in the summer now, which I quite like. I quite like delving into some of these issues a little bit longer, a little bit more, and boy, do we have a lot of issues. I mean, it's supposed to be the quiet time of the summer, and yet every week there is something going on. This week, of course, the worst kept secret in BC politics, David Eby, the Attorney General, launching his bid for the BC NDP leadership, and we are going to jump right into that and break it apart and tell you what you need to know there with the OG Pod Squad all here for our last episode before a summer break. We have Jillian Oliver, Katy Merrifield, and Jeff Ferrier all here to break this down. So we've talked about this for weeks. Who wants to jump in first? Katy, why don't we start with you on this? David Eby launches. He launches with an overwhelming number of supporters. I think it's 48 of 57 candidates. Pretty impressive. What did you make of what he did?
It was impressive. And actually, I got to see him when he was recording on Mo's show. And I said that directly to him. I was like, from my political operative to you, like that was an incredible show of dominance. Caucus support, there's a lot of debate as to how relevant that is in a leadership campaign. But when you have 48 out of 57 standing beside you, it's over before it's begun, which was the point, I imagine. I think the endorsement from Rabi is key, given he is more on the Horgan side of the NDP coalition. And I will say, like, while I would not agree in Eby's, huge vote of confidence in Minister Malcolmson, I did appreciate that he committed on the opioid file to scale up residential drug treatment options. And I sincerely hope he sees that through. So that was like my assessment from a pros perspective. I think that he's going to have some challenges. So in his comms, he set three main priorities: family doctors, the cost of fuel and groceries, as well as housing. So obviously that is smart. These are the top of mind issues for British Columbians. But he also, I think even in the same sentence, stated that he wasn't looking to radically depart from the track the Horgan government was on. So I don't think it's excessively partisan to say the government hasn't delivered meaningfully on these priorities. And so I think that might be a communications challenge going forward, as well as a wedge opportunity for the BC Liberals. But overall, that was an impressive launch. This race is over. He's going to be acclaimed.
The not radically departing line, which caught me as well, which I think makes a lot of sense, Jillian, given that clearly some people in caucus and cabinet have swallowed their pride or own ambitions or preference on perhaps someone else to endorse. Not to say that he didn't already have a large base, to rally around the idea of unity and stable continuation of government and not freak the public out that this NDP government that people seem to like a lot, according to the polls under John Horgan, is changing. And what does that mean? So did that make sense to you? And what else caught your eye on his launch?
Yeah, for sure. I think I wasn't really expecting that to be like such the top line message coming from his campaign. And I'm sure it wouldn't have been had Kaylon not bowed out and supported him. Somewhere there's like a file of what his original launch materials were going to be. And I'm sure they were pretty different. And it kind of, you kind of almost seemed like he was a little bit disappointed to not be able to come out kind of guns blazing with, his vision and his message of how he wants to lead. But I think, that's to be expected given that he's not going to have much of a fight in the race. I think it makes sense given, there's so many different changing headwinds right now, just as we sort of reach like the housing crisis being the worst that it's ever been, we're starting to see the market go down, which we talked about last week, has huge implications for the provincial budget and also for how, the government approaches the housing file. So I think it's smart to sort of just, given that he's not going to face a lot of a lot of opposition, if any, in his race to sort of just kind of get through it, keep the caucus together, not rattle any cages, and then kind of, focus on what he wants to do once he gets in. That said, I think, it shows that he is kind of going to be missing the opportunity that candidates get in a leadership race to really show who they are to the public. It was kind of like a bit of a nothing message, right? Like, don't worry, everything's going to just kind of be the same. In this kind of a race, you don't get the opportunity to tell your story and to sort of show your style, and to talk a lot about issues and ideas and promises and those kinds of things. So he's going to have a lot, I think, to make up for, assuming that he does become premier in the fall or winter, depending on when that happens. But I think, it makes sense given what happened with Kalon, that this was his message.
It's a really interesting point that you raised, because you're right. If it had been a race, we would have seen a platform from David Eby. We would have seen a vision. We would have seen some big promises. And now, potentially, he doesn't have to do that. He'll do that once he's premier. And it's harder, perhaps, for the public to get a sense of what to expect, other than this is a continuation of government, which we're not going to make any giant waves right from the beginning. But, Jeff, the messaging, the launch, the endorsements, a pretty impressive package. What did you make of it?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting us back onto the show after having Vaughn Palmer on last week. A bit of a tough act to follow.
Full disclosure, Vaughn was unavailable this week, so...
Oh, you're breaking my heart. I think when we're assessing the success of the launch, we need to think about who was Eby talking to. And he was talking to two different audiences, and he had two different messages for those audiences. His first audience was New Democrat members and prospective members and people thinking of running for leadership. And his message was 48 caucus members, cabinet members. I can't think of an NDP leadership where there's been that substantive amount of support for one candidate. And they clearly listened to Katy's advice on the podcast from a few weeks ago.
2014.
About start from a position of strength, right? Communicate strength. And that's exactly what he and his team did there, and did it better than anyone. I think and I take the points on, he could have done more talking about, why I want to be the premier. Here's my specific vision. Here's my platform. And I think that he'll flesh that out over the weeks to come. And you're starting to see that in some of the news coverage that's happening. Talk in one of the media outlets about public building of housing for middle-class families. Seems like something that he wanted to pursue when he was minister and couldn't get the go-ahead. And now that he's going to go into the premier's office, unless there's a cataclysmic event that changes things, sending a signal that, that's going to be a priority for him. But you think of most British Columbians, when I try to have discussions with them like the ones we have on this podcast, it's a very narrow audience of people who want to get into the super details of policy and platform right from the get-go. And they just want to have, when they look at their government, they want to have a sense of, are you focused on the right things? Do you have the right values? What's the tone? And am I happy overall with the way things are going? And for most British Columbians now, according to polls, folks are satisfied with the way the government is performing. So that message of stability was very much aimed. He's not talking just to the party members now. He's talking to British Columbians. It's like he's talking, like, that's the message of, the 48, the campaign's over, and now I'm focused on you, British Columbians. And what you want to hear is that the government that you have now, who you seem to like, you think there are challenges. There are obviously things that they need to be doing better, and we've talked about some of them. But in terms of the overall approach, don't be afraid. It's going to be fine. The government that you're going to get is going to be very much like the government you've got, with some changes and shifts as I come in, and particularly on housing.
It's a great point that there are two different audiences here, and we often sometimes forget that most of us don't get to participate in selecting the new premier. You have to be an NDP member. So he is speaking to the NDP membership as well, and then the general public. I think that's a good way to sort of differentiate some of the things that he's saying. I guess the question now is, now what? It seems like he's the only candidate. If there was another one, I would think that it would have to be some type of outsider. It's possible under the party rules that somebody could choose to run until, say, October 3rd before they have to pay $40,000 to the party in order to get their name on the final ballot. I guess that might be something we might see, or does everyone just stay out of this thing and give him room? Jillian, what do you think is a likely outcome? You've been involved in leadership races for the Greens. Do you see someone else jumping in here from the outside just to start a discussion, or is everyone intimidated off by this launch?
Yeah, I mean, anything can happen. Like in our race, I ran Sonia Firsteno's campaign. We had a challenger that we expected early on. That wasn't, we didn't see as too much of a threat. And then we had someone, Cam Brewer, come in later in the race after we weren't expecting it. I think what happened, if I remember correctly, was that the race got extended because of the pandemic, and that gave more time for someone who was kind of thinking about it to jump in. And you kind of need a few things for that to happen. Like, you need both the candidate that's willing to sort of put their name out there and put their name on the line. And there's lots of reasons, they might be doing that to win. And we've talked about before, this is a big prize. You get to be premier, but people also use leadership races to gain their name recognition. They might be thinking about, running as an MLA for the first time or something like that. So there's other reasons why people might want to jump into the race. So you need the candidate, and then you also need a team. So right now, I think, there's probably lots of conversations out there, both from people who are thinking about running as well as people who would like to work on a different campaign to see if they can kind of get the resources and the kind of inspiration together to give it a go. So yeah, I haven't heard anything, but I do anticipate that there are people out there sort of weighing the options, thinking about, do I want to, raise a specific issue, or do I want to, do it because I think it's the right thing for the party to show a little bit more diversity in the race. There's lots of different reasons why people might still want to jump in. And like you said, there's still lots of time. So I think it's definitely possible, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
I have a
Katy?
question. Yeah. So I want to hear from Jeff on this, because this has been like a minor obsession of mine. I have said for a long time, I think that the NDP handled these leadership races correctly, intelligently, strategically. I think long, drawn out leadership races are, in a word, stupid. All they do is foster division. They're rarely substantive in terms of policy. And so from like an operational view, I think what they are doing is intelligent. But I am not a New Democrat, and I am curious as to how let's say the more activist wing of the party, like, how are they going to react if essentially they're seeing a boomer white male pass the crown to a Gen X white male? Like, what is the response there? And I know the party and others will say, hey, look, the framework is out for this leadership race. Anyone can join. But just that visual, and that's so outside of the brand that the NDP wants to put forward. So I'm curious to hear from a New Democrat on their thoughts on how that will be received.
I'm on the hot seat.
Yes.
Tough question. Look, I would say that there are small pockets within the activist base that I think on an issues basis would like to see another candidate step forward, and particularly respecting issues around the environment. I think that here and there I've heard comments along the lines that you've suggested, Katy. But I think the answer to it, and I hear back from electeds and folks in the party is a focus on team. David Eby and John Horgan are not one man bands. You have a very diverse and capable team around him. You look at his on his campaign, Katrina Chen and Ravi Kahlon all playing significant roles. You have a gender balanced cabinet with women and men from all sorts of different backgrounds and real important roles of responsibility. And you look at the BC Liberals, and they've got Teresa Watt and Michael Lee, and everyone else is pretty uniform and how they look in their background. So it's a focus. It's going to have to be a focus on team and making sure that folks on the team continue to have meaningful public-facing roles of responsibility, and that they're equipped with the backing and freedom to do their work in a meaningful way. One thing I wanted to say about leadership is, one of the reasons why I maybe some of it is just doing leadership smart. And I grew up watching the 1983 liberal federal leadership and progressive conservative leadership on TV, and I found myself watching them before this show on YouTube because it was fascinating, the big arena and all the factions and the many votes, and it was super fun to watch. And I remember even as like a 10 or 11 year old being fascinated by would Joe Clark win or would Brian Mulroney oust him. But I think one of the things that happened here is that folks really wanted John Horgan to be well and to stay on. They looked at him, these people in caucus. So there wasn't a lot of this, Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien style behind the scenes leadership plotting happening. Sure, there were folks who had ambition and were laying a groundwork, but they didn't have ready to go leadership bids. What you had was a whole bunch of people who were head down, focused on their work, hoping the premier was going to stick around because he's done so well and his numbers and the public opinion research have been so good. So, they're invested in the mission, and then they had a very short window to decide. And EB came in and got the endorsements that he's got. And they just said, you know what? Not going to happen. Not going to happen for me. Anyways, I've talked too long, so we'll probably want to edit this down by about 3 minutes. And let's move on.
Oh, we'll just edit it out, Jeff. Don't worry about it. No, don't worry about it. We'll edit you down to 4 words. It'll be all good. What about? Do we make anything about who didn't endorse David Eby? And our show has a text chain where we chat about things during the week. Sorry to blow the secrets for everyone there, but one of the first things that we and a lot of people in BC politics did is, well, who's the people who didn't endorse David Eby? And when you break it down, there's about 9 people. You take Eby himself out, because I'm assuming he endorsed himself. Well, that'd be a hell of a story if he didn't. But John Horgan is premier, staying neutral. Raz Chauhan, the speaker, staying neutral. Michelle Babchuk, the North Island MLA, a party table officer, staying neutral. George Chow, Vancouver MLA, who knows? Rolly Russell, I think Boundary Similkameen. It sounds like he has a bit of an ethical issue of waiting until the candidate nomination period ends before endorsing someone, which is fine. Brittany Anderson, Nelson Creston, youth ambassador to the existing premier, might be looking for an environmental candidate who isn't Eby. Selena Robinson, the finance minister, not a fan of Eby, didn't endorse him, didn't run. And then Nathan Cullen, who did not run and also didn't endorse. Is there anything we take away from that list, or is it just kind of, it is what it is? And we don't have to go around the whole table here. Just anyone who wants to jump in on that and what we should or shouldn't think about that.
Sometimes it can be indicative of folks who are not planning to run again. They just want to finish out their term. And so they're not interested in getting into the rigmarole of leadership races. I think it's more impactful if it's a cabinet minister. I found Selena Robinson wasn't particularly surprising for reasons that you've outlined and others. Colin was interesting because I think that my view was that he was seriously considering a bid himself, like the language that he was using in the days leading up to his final decision to not run. It really seemed like that was something that he wanted to do, but perhaps, put his own ambitions aside for the good of the team, the organization, and maybe just wants to keep his head down. Maybe there's conflict there. Like there's often a number of reasons, from, fascinating to procedural. But I didn't take anything from the group as a whole. I did think the cabinet ministers were interesting, particularly Cullen.
I wasn't too surprised by it. I think the overall idea that pretty much everyone lined up behind Eby is the message to take away, and not necessarily just the handful of MLAs. But the next question that I want to throw to you guys, and let's keep it, if we can, let's try to do positive and negatives on this for everybody, so we don't end up kind of on one side of the fence or the other. But Eby versus Falcon, you have two guys who were almost leaders of their party in the last leadership race. Falcon was defeated by Christy Clark in 2011. Eby dropped out because he had a kid unexpectedly in 2014 to Horgan. Now they're back together, going to go toe-to-toe. I can't see a way in which Eby doesn't win this thing. What do we make of that matchup? And everyone sort of turns their mind to it now. We saw the opposition Liberals and the Greens start to talk about David Eby and his government this week and start to assign the issues of the government, healthcare and affordability, back to Eby rather than Horgan. And as we begin to look at that sort of matchup that's going to exist, what are the sort of pros and cons that both of those gentlemen, not to exclude Sonia Furstenau, but we've obviously talked about her position hasn't changed. Those two gentlemen kind of facing off in the public debate on BC politics. Jillian, what comes to mind there?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is just that Eby has been like one of the most effective critics against the Liberals. Like that's kind of like been his whole career, right? Like he famously ousted Christy Clark from her own seat when he was first elected in 2013. And then he became, kind of rose to like provincial prominence as the NDP's main critic on the housing file, basting the Liberals for their performance as the crisis was spiraling out of control between 2013 and 2017. And then after the NDP assumed government, he was responsible for the framing of the ICBC dumpster fire, the money laundering inquiry. So he's going to be I think we can expect probably a pretty strong continuation of that theme, this sort of like binary like vision of like framing of how the NDP likes to talk about the province of this like before time and now, like where BC was being governed by a party that was only for a few wealthy individuals and kind of implying that they are mishandling or even corrupt in some cases. So I think we can expect like a continued very strong kind of barrage of things. What's changed though is the timing. Like I am hearing a lot more from people that they're sort of starting to, even though they do remember the shortcomings of the Liberal government and why they voted them out, they're starting to wonder why the NDP keeps talking about that so much, and they want to hear more about the future and why things aren't getting better, why in some cases they're getting worse. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how he sort of manages his instinct, which is to really, go after the Liberals really hard, talk about how bad things were before, and sort of temper that with ensuring that he is bringing forward solutions that are actually like that people can feel.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. I absolutely agree with that. He does have that not killer instinct to really kind of find a way to wedge the Liberals, and maybe that comes from his time in opposition as a very, very effective critic, and taking that into his cabinet portfolio. And can he continue to do that against Falcon? I assume he will, and he can, but you're right. There is that pressure to also balance it out. Jeff, Eby versus Falcon, two highly intelligent, competent political adversaries. What are the pros and cons of those matchups, do you think?
Okay, let's just do pros and cons of both of them as I see them. And I'll try and be brief here because I was super long before. David Eby, pros, he's super smart. He really knows how to work a file and get things done, which is not always easy to do. And he's fearless. He'll take on anyone, anything. And he's proven that in the work that he's done with ICBC and on housing and on the opioid class action suit. Cons, I think he needs to, in the weeks ahead, let folks know more about who he is as a person, and why he wants to be premier.
Okay, good point. Katy, jump in. Eby, Falcon, pros and cons, this matchup that is starting now and is going to take over our sort of political debate. What are your thoughts on it?
I agree with Jillian that this will be a binary choice, and I think that's a good thing. I think we are going to see a marked contrast in terms of approach, in terms of policy, in terms of message. And what's kind of fascinating about the two of them is they have a commonality in terms of background, and that is organization. Eby was a prominent organizer on more of the activist side, as well as for the NDP. I believe he co-chaired Horgan's campaign after 2013, however brief that may have been. And Kevin was, Gordon Campbell's 2IC back in the late 90s, early 2000s with Total Recall. Both of them have extensive networks on the ground. And with that organizational background, you are really going to see, a battle of winning the hearts and minds, not only in terms of like message and policy, but actual organizational capability. I think Eby he's a smart and certainly calculating politician, with lots of appeal from the activist and environmental base. But, I do wonder, is he going to appeal to the, average Joe and Jane in the Maple Ridge suburbs, for example? He's also, Horgan, as Mike McDonald noted recently on a national podcast, he's a unicorn with fairly unprecedented likability. So will Eby be able to capture that magic? Time will tell. Both are also interesting because they have rather cemented brands in terms of folks who don't like them. Like if you don't like Eby, you see him as a far left activist who may impose radical change when given the reins of power. If you don't like Kevin, you see him as a gatekeeper of the 1%, who, imposed untold damage over the last 16 years. Like those kind of hysterical narratives apply to both of them. And so what I also like about the two of them is they're not afraid to launch pointed attacks. And we've seen Eby do that over the last year. He had a podcast with an entire segment dedicated to Kevin Falcon. And when Eby announced, the BC Liberals were remarkably swift and pointed in their criticism. I saw that as quid pro quo for the NDP's decades-long obsession with Kevin Falcon. However, defining your opponent is key. So at the end of the day, this is going to be an exciting time in BC politics. I think you are really going to have a binary choice, and I look forward to that debate.
Yeah, it will be exciting. And I think the public, both of these gentlemen have to do some work to get the public to see them beyond their titles and their history as leaders. They're both very accomplished, and who can be premier? How does the public view them? They're going to be the brand of their party. Their face is going to be on the side of the bus. Who do you want to vote for? A lot of people vote for the leader and not just their local candidate too. So that is that's what I think they're going to spend the summer doing. We see Kevin Falcon touring BC up north and through the interior right now. I'm sure Eby is going to start that as part of his leadership race, trying to connect with the public and show people a little bit more about himself. And I think, it's going to be interesting to watch them debate in the House too, because they're both very sharp, very quick, very skilled kind of veteran sort of debaters, and they cut hard and fast in their comments. They don't give a lot of ground. So I think that debate is just going to be fascinating to watch, although we're going to have a weird fall session where Premier John Horgan is still in charge, theoretically. And, I foresee situations where the opposition jumps up and says, I'd like to hear from the premier on this subject. No, not the current premier, the real premier or the presumptive premier or the guy with the real power. And that'll be a difficult thing for Horgan to have to adjust to in a session where it doesn't do anyone any good to score points off of him, this incredibly popular outgoing guy. And all the debate is going to be focused on Eby. So let's just close off this show with some predictions of the last half of the year. We've reached the halfway point. We're going to go on a bit of a summer break here for a few weeks, and it's worth kind of maybe just looking at what the last half of the year might be. If we have any wild predictions, I mean, it's such such an interesting time. Can we say anything about what we think, where we're going to be and what we're going to be looking at by the end of the year, and how the landscape is going to look? Jeff, what do you think of that?
I have two predictions. One is stating the obvious, and one I'm just going to go right out there on a limb. I think the obvious one is there's going to be a great big cabinet shuffle. There's going to be a lot of people, familiar faces in roles that we've grown accustomed to seeing them in, who will be moving on to new roles. Part of this is a function of leadership. Part of it, though, is a function of the government being at midterm, and also a function of starting to move in the second half of a government and wanting to know who's going to reoffer in the next election. And you want people who are in cabinet who are going to run again. The other prediction I'm a little bit more iffy on, but I'm hoping that my MLA, Adam Olsen, if you're listening, if you could do some work on the potholes on the southern Gulf Islands, they're really bad. And I think you're going to get it done. I think you're going to bring the attention to bear on those potholes, and you're going to get them fixed, and you're going to cement your status and spot here in the local riding as a good local constituency MLA.
I want Adam to do that just so we can stop hearing Jeff complain about this on our text group 50 times a day. So yeah, for us, please, can you make sure this gets done? Thanks.
Blacktop politics, the highway politics. You gotta love it. Potholes and those little yellow lines in interior and northern ridings on the road that the paint disappears. Man, those are big issues for local MLAs. So, all right, that's interesting. I agree with you, Jeff. I think we're going to see some new faces in cabinet. It doesn't make any sense for the leader to keep the same cabinet, and I expect to see people like Nikki Sharma elevated way up into cabinet, and some others perhaps. I mean, the real question will be, does he grow cabinet? Does Premier Eby grow cabinet and give everyone a role, which is the most artful way to handle things? We'll create a new minister of red tape reduction and a new minister of whatever, and then everyone gets a parliamentary secretary job or something else. Or do you drop people from cabinet entirely and streamline it and make way for it? Jillian or Katy, what do you want? Jillian, what's your predictions? Do you have any?
Well, I don't like making predictions that much, but I like the cabinet is already really big. If he grows it more, I don't know if that's a great look, but it'll be telling in terms of how good of a handle he thinks he has on caucus, I guess. What else is going to happen? We're going to have a by-election in Surrey. I think that's going to be really, really interesting, and sort of like the first test of what we were just talking about, of sort of like these clashing visions of the Liberals and the NDP. And I think that, like, just thinking about what we just talked about, I think we are going to see a very, like, by the end of the year, once presumably Eby comes in, like a pretty, partisan, heated, reductive, like almost return to like the conversation, like the political dynamics that we had like before 2017 when the Greens got more seats and we had the minority government. It kind of shifted things a little bit, and I think that I don't know how well that's going to sit with people, to be honest. I think people are really, like, I don't think that there's a lot of appetite for that kind of, like, can I swear a little bit because we're on a podcast? Or
go ahead.
Say, like,
yeah.
Okay, shitty,
do it, Jillian.
Like, shitty, hyper-partisan, like, reductive stuff. I think people are feeling like these, like, today, horrible story of a person that passed away waiting for emergency care in North Vancouver. Like, we're really facing some serious problems. I hope, I think it's going to be a difficult time as, like, these two leaders kind of come head to head. And I hope, I think I hope that the Greens can help to kind of resume that role where they add a little bit more nuance to the debate, and that we can kind of actually see some progress in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Katy, both your predictions, and also let me ask you about, you've been involved in governments that changed leaders midstream. So David Eby, Premier, does he get rid of people like, not get rid of, does he demote someone like Selena Robinson, who is a very great person and I think has done a pretty good job as finance minister? But because of the dynamics of the race, do you move someone like that out, or do you offer them an olive branch to keep the unity, or how do you manage a kind of caucus or a cabinet shuffle with sort of tensions in mid-government? And then what do you think of what we expect just in a larger sense this last half of the year?
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to depend on when, is there going to be somebody that comes in and challenges Eby, and then the race goes to December, because that will have a material impact, particularly with the finance minister. In December, you are knee deep preparing for the budget in a very meaningful way. So it would be less than appropriate, I think, to remove a finance minister at that time. In October, sure, you've got a couple more months, but if Eby is promising a steady as she goes government, then why have a major cabinet shuffle at this time? Why not wait until after you deliver the budget next spring? Also possibly in the lead up to a fall election, because that's when you want to profile new folks, and that's when folks will have to indicate for sure whether or not they're running again. So that's what I would be looking out for in terms of cabinet changes. In terms of predictions, I think that the NDP popularity is going to decline. And that's not a verdict at this time on Eby's forthcoming leadership. But I think Horgan brought so much in terms of brand and likability to the NDP. And without him, there is going to be a drop off. Not to mention, as others have noted, BC is going through a tough time right now. Like housing costs, rising gas, rising food costs, people dying because they can't have access to healthcare, lack of physicians, the continuing opioid crisis. There's a lot going on right now, and I think that Horgan, to his credit, was able to capitalize on his popularity, his political capital, his messaging, the folks around him. And without that, I think that you are going to see a decline in popularity, which is a huge opportunity for the BC Liberals. And they have to seize on that. They have to, especially if there's only a year before the next election. I think they need to take every single opportunity to fire back at the NDP, because now Teflon Horgan, or what was his nickname?
The Teflon Premier. Yeah.
Teflon Premier. He's not there anymore. So I think the next 6 months are going to be absolutely critical in terms of framing your opponent and laying out your vision for the next election, which I know Eby said he wasn't going to call a new one, but he left a caveat that unless he learns new information. So that's always telling.
Yeah, no, I would think we have an election next fall. And, because not necessarily because, both from the point of what you just said, Katy, this government is facing huge problems that it may or may not be able to even solve. And the longer it waits, the more people are going to be upset by those problems. And it's not like it's going to get any easier for them in terms of popularity the further away they get from Horgan. So it would be better to jump and get a new mandate while you can. You've still got the Horgan bump. You've still got the perhaps the public sentiment of, well, let's give these guys a shot, versus 2 years from now when solving the healthcare crisis is a long-term issue. Now, it can't be solved overnight, so you want a 4-year mandate to do it rather than try to jam in something in the last year and a half or 2 years. So I agree with you. I think that that's going to be a fascinating timeline to watch, and we are going to be back talking to you.
2 quick follow-up. 2 quick.
Okay.
Hey,
all right,
before
Jeff,
you,
go ahead.
Before you end the show, 2 quick follow-ups. One, these are challenges the whole world is facing. Right. I was talking to someone earlier this week, and their first line to me was, "So how long do you think the planet has left?" So it's an awkward time for governments everywhere. The second thing was, Rob, what did you say about Selena Robinson and her work in cabinet? I think I heard you say that she did a pretty good job as finance minister. And if so, congratulations, you're going to be in an election leaflet And whenever the election is called, I think it's going to be in 2 years, but you just made it into a leaflet.
Right. No, I have a lot of time for Selena Robinson. I think she's a great person and a good cabinet minister. And, it's just finance minister is one of those
More
roles.
content.
Yeah, one of those roles where, if I was David Eby, I would be seriously thinking about Ravi Kahlon as a finance minister, not because of Selena Robinson, but because it's the kind of role that you give your greatest ally / opponent. Kevin Falcon was named finance minister after facing off against Christy Clark. You make them your deputy and your 2IC, and that's how you consolidate the unity of the party. But I honestly don't know. I just think it's one of those questions that the new premier will have to face. And I agree with you, Jeff. We'll probably see quite a big cabinet shuffle at some point too. But as Katy pointed out, if it's in December, it's difficult with the budget, and you sort of you're going to have ministers going through budget estimates in the spring. Brand new ministers, do you want to do that? I guess that's okay. It might make more sense to do it after the session, but then you're 6 months into a premiership, and we all know that those first kind of 100 days are momentum days where you get things done. And do you want to have the right team in place to do it? There's lots of questions. We will break it down and overanalyze it and take you through it in the weeks ahead. We are taking a bit of a break here, possibly for the next 4 weeks, coming back in mid to late August. It'll depend on maybe if something incredible happens and we want to reconvene, but we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you being with us on Political Capital each and every week. And make sure you subscribe to get any episodes that come up in the summer. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back with you in the future.